Charlie and Joseph walked through the forest trail.
So, Joseph, what's the plan again?
Charlie asked, making sure he was correct about every little detail.
Well, if I have to repeat it for you to get it right, I'll repeat. The plan is for us to follow this walkway, which will lead us to a back entrance to this carnival. Understand?
Joseph asked, looking at Charlie with a raised eyebrow. Charlie looked up quickly after having spaced out.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, fantastic. Next, we'll pretend to be staff, which our appearances already give us legitimacy. Then, we will find 2 victims. Young children, preferably. Just like the Great Retriever suggested.
Joseph said, with a proud tone in his voice. He had been putting together this plan for weeks. Charlie envied Joseph's confidence and ability to come up with such schemes. To think he hadn't been convicted of any crimes yet. It was a crazy thought to Charlie.
Sounds good.
Charlie nervously looked around at the woods surrounding the trail. The awkward silence was only interrupted by the sounds of the wildlife surrounding them.
So, how's the family, eh?
Charlie said, trying to start a conversation.
I don't really share my personal life. To me, we are sole partners in a business, I suppose you could call it.
Oh, okay.
Charlie let out a strained laugh to himself. To have a conversation with Joseph was always difficult, but the walk was finally coming to an end anyway. The feel of carnival music, lights, and smells blasted their way. The atmosphere of the carny was palpable, and nostalgic in a sense for Charlie.
Well, we're here. Prepare yourselves, Evans. This will be a hard one.
Yeah, I'll try my best not to mess a singular thing up, sorry.
Joseph looked at Charlie with an uncertain look.
I'd hope so.
Joseph signaled Charlie to walk in, and the two entered through the back.
You know, the reason this back entrance exists is quite interesting, actually.
Joseph began.
Before I became a circus performer, this was where I would work. At the local carnival. I made this entrance years ago to let friends in for free. Of course, I don't think anyone's found out about it.
Charlie found this tale interesting. Mostly because of the fact Joseph had friends, but that's beside the point. The two walked through a narrow, concrete hallway, but the sound of rides, civilians, and music grew nearer. Charlie observed the hallway. It was lined to the brim with several props and posters, seemingly belonging to clowns of yesteryear. Posters plastered on the wall, though heavily faded, read out several clowns' names. One read, "The Insane Buster the Clown," in huge, bold letters. Along with the text, it had an older-looking photo of a clown with typical clown colors of blue, red, and yellow. What Charlie found most interesting was the clown appeared to be wearing contacts that made his eyes look completely black, save for the irises, which were a sickly orange. Charlie looked at some of the other posters, which read, "The Incredible Mr. Moldy," "The Peculiar Mr. Salty and His Little Willie," and "Sweetie the Clown." Charlie had never seen most of these clowns, but he did find their names familiar. Outside of the posters, several other props were scattered about the hallway. A sign that read, "Free Hugs," in all red letters, was sitting on a table in the room, with a doll of a vintage-looking clown next to it. The doll was waving back and forth, but didn't seem to be powered by anything. Charlie spoke up.
Hey, wait a second. Who are these people?
Charlie yelled, trying to get Joseph's attention from the other end of the hallway. Joseph shifted over to Charlie to inspect the objects.
Simple. These are the people involved in the Carolina killings. I'm surprised you don't recognize them,
Joseph said. Charlie was both confused and captivated.
Carolina killings? Never heard of it. Never heard of these fellas either.
Charlie pointed at the posters. Knowing these actors had been involved with crime, it made sense their promotional material would be hidden here.
Intriguing. It was a very infamous event. In fact, it's still an active investigation by the locals. Conspiracies or something of that sort, though we have no time to discuss it. We have to get going,
Joseph said, starting to head toward the exit. While walking, Joseph stopped dead in his tracks, like a deer in headlights. He slowly stepped back over to the posters and began to glare at them without speaking or moving. Joseph seemed captivated by the props, even though he shook them off previously. Charlie, despite leaving his side, continued down the hallway. He turned to see Joseph still inspecting the props and posters.
Joseph? What happened to getting out of here?
Charlie yelled down the hall, waving for Joseph. Joseph quickly snapped out of his daze.
Oh, I apologize.
The two grouped up and left the hallway. They peeked out of an entryway leading to a ride queue, noticing the ride was closed. The pair took the chance to insert themselves among the several characters at the carnival.
Okay. I think we both know what to do from here. I will lead you. Be sure to avoid saying anything too revealing. We don't want them to know who we are.
Joseph whispered, looking at a crowd of people. They gazed at the carnival scene. Charlie felt nostalgic here despite never working at a carnival. Joseph spoke again.
All right, Evans. We will stay together and find whoever we can. Come on.
Joseph said as the two walked off into the carnival.
Can't get a hold of her. Damn it.
Jake said, angrily slamming his phone on the bench. He looked around at the rides and booths and sighed. He had been sitting at the entrance to a ride for ages trying to get a hold of his mother.
Do you think we can go ask someone?
Jake's sister Kora asked, peering up to Jake's height.
No, Kora. We already tried that. No one's seen her.
Jake said, looking down at Kora. He suddenly found himself getting red like he was on the verge of a burst of emotion. He kept himself composed, however.
For now, we just need to find somewhere to hang out. And hopefully, she'll come looking for us.
The two began to walk around, looking for somewhere to stay for a while. Jake didn't even know why his mom had left. All he knew was he and Kora went to go get on a ride and she just vanished. Where she went, he still didn't even have the smallest clue. The whole mood of the trip completely shifted after the ride. Jake simply wasn't prepared for a situation like this. Never did he think he would be left to watch his little sister this young. But here he was anyway. The two passed several booths and rides. Popcorn vendors, carnival games, you name it.
I don't think there's anything here, Kora. Lucky us, huh?
Jake said, groggily looking over to his sister.
Can't even damn believe we're stuck in this mess.
Jake said under his breath, still looking around nervously. He spotted a clown in the distance. He was on stilts and appeared to be in a blue and yellow spotted costume. He had red, flowing hair and a shiny yellow color. He had a very warm and comfy energy to him, and he appeared to be greeting pedestrians. Kora quickly let go of Jake's hand at the sight of the clown.
Kora!
Jake shouted. She ran over to the clown and began to get his attention. The clown cut himself off from greeting someone and looked around confused. He gazed down at Kora. The clown bit down as much as he could.
Hey there, little fella. Why, you're so tiny, I suppose everything's big to you, huh?
The clown said, heartily chuckling afterward. He wiped off tears from his face from laughing, and then put all his attention on Kora.
Hi.
Kora said, shyly looking at the clown.
We want to know if there's anywhere we can go to indoors,
she said, looking around to express what she meant. The clown scratched his bald head.
Well, I'd say the only place you could go indoors is the arcade. Yes, the arcade.
The clown nodded several times, still looming over Kora. His smile gleamed towards Jake. Jake walked up to the clown upon hearing about an arcade.
And where's that at?
Jake said, grabbing Kora's hand again. The clown stood up to get a better view, observing the surroundings intently. After a while, he started pointing to a building.
That's where the arcade is. You'll have no trouble finding it. It has a huge sign,
he said, letting out yet another laugh. Jake nodded to the clown, showing his respect. The clown bent down a bit more and held out his hand to Jake. Jake was confused at first, but then shook his hand. Jake nervously smiled.
Thank you?
Jake said, looking up at the looming clown.
No problem, bucko.
The clown said, stretching up to his full height to continue greeting guests. The two siblings started to move toward the arcade.
Have a great rest of your time,
the clown yelled from a distance, giving a thumbs up. Jake smiled and waved back at the goofy character. The two siblings continued to gain on the arcade, seeing several kooky characters on the rides. Jake could also see several other families walking through the area. Complete families. Jake wondered how strange he looked wandering around with just his little sister. To Jake, it didn't really matter. He needed to find his mom. Jake and Kora could see the huge sign the clown had been telling them about in the distance, reading Big Top Arcade in huge, elegant yellow letters. Kora started running to it excitedly, while Jake tried to keep up with her. The two stopped in front of a huge yellow and orange building. Jake stood completely still, observing the surrounding area. He felt safe here, as there would be staff he could go to if they truly didn't find their mom. Jake glared over at Kora.
Well, let's head in.
Charlie and Joseph skulked around the huge property, trying to locate who they needed, but had found no leads whatsoever. As they continued mindlessly wandering, they noticed a huge crowd ahead. But as the crowd started to break apart, Charlie gradually noticed a single man heading towards them. He speed-walked toward them and pointed at them.
Hey, you two. You need to come with me.
He said, with a grave tone in his voice. Charlie read his name tag. It read, Andrew Simmons, Manager. Charlie immediately broke into a cold sweat, but Joseph remained calm. The two followed the man into a small building with few windows and only one door. The man opened the door and the two followed inside. The manager cleared his throat.
So, who are you two? I've got no records of you at all. No clown I know of works here that looks like you.
Simmons said, looking at the file on his desk. Charlie spoke up.
Well, I'm, Charlie the Clown. I applied here about a week ago when the flies went up for applications.
Charlie let out a weak snicker to himself, trying to lighten the mood.
I don't have a Charlie the Clown on file, sir. It might have been a mistake, but I...
Yeah. It was likely a mistake. I was sure I applied here since it was my first opportunity as of recent.
Charlie said, twiddling his thumbs in his chair.
You seem passionate about your career.
Simmons said nonchalantly. He turned to Joseph.
And who are you?
Well, I'll tell you who I am. Andrew.
Joseph said, glaring at the man's name tag. He spoke with a raspier tone than usual. He looked at the man for a few seconds with a demonic gaze. Joseph grabbed the man's shoulder with inhuman speed, pulling Andrew to his chest. Joseph fished for a switchblade located in his pocket, and without hesitation slit the man's throat before he could even speak. The man stayed still for several seconds, the life draining from his eyes. Joseph backed away from the man, causing his body to collapse onto the ground. Blood gushed out of his neck as he gagged and coughed. Charlie may have been sweating before, but now he was extremely nervous. Joseph proceeded to walk over to a corner of the room and mangle a camera with his blade. After doing so, Joseph scanned the man's body and then shifted his gaze to Charlie.
Now you understand why I wear gloves, don't you?
Joseph said, cackling to himself.
What the fuck? Why did you kill... Why?
Charlie stumbled on his words, wondering why Joseph found what he did so hilarious.
If we kept him alive, it would have drawn more attention to us. Now, come along.
Joseph said. He showed no repentance for what he did, but in Charlie's mind, no one would be surprised. Joseph had always been a cold-hearted, remorseless husk of a person. Everyone that knew him on this level would hesitate to agree. Charlie opened the door to the manager's quarters, and they stepped back into the open.
Oh, by the way, you're a horrible liar, Bucket,
Joseph said with a mocking smirk. Charlie ruffled his brow and crossed his arms.
I damn told you to stop using that stupid code name, Joseph. They're ridiculous.
Yes, of course. Now, come along. We still have work to do,
Joseph said as the two entered back into the Carney atmosphere. Charlie was still shaken up by the events that unfurled in front of him. They were so sudden. His plan left no time for thinking, though. Charlie needed to be quick on his feet to not land himself in prison for life. The two clowns entered themselves among another crowd of people. People were waving at both Charlie and Joseph as if they were actually staff. Charlie felt this plan, as difficult as it was to execute, might save his ass once again. Jake slowly walked into the arcade, still holding Kora's hand.
So, make yourself comfortable, I guess. We'll be here for a while.
Jake whispered to her. He couldn't help but feel like he had to be quiet. The arcade was barren, and only the arcades and TVs made any noise. Jake sat down at a table and quickly pulled out his phone. Nothing. He sighed loudly and placed his palm over his face. He felt like punching something. Kora had wandered off to another table to seat herself in front of a TV, which was playing a strange cartoon she had never heard of. It began shortly after she had seated herself, showing the title in large, eccentric letters. It read Clown Train. Kora, despite not knowing the show beforehand, felt oddly familiar. As the episode began, an announcer voiced over, saying, "Clown Train returns now." Soon after, a colorful-looking clown walked on screen. He had a grotesque smile and his eyes were swirled. He tugged on another character's shirt, trying to get something from him. Kora couldn't hear the TV very well, so the dialogue was hard to make out. She sat and watched for a few minutes. The show was mostly just nonsensical slapstick, having the main character, who she only knew as Wacky, hit people with his hammer. She lost interest quickly. Kora stood up from the table and decided to go to where Jake was.
Hey, Kora, check this out.
Jake shouted, cracking the silence like glass. She pivoted over to him, observing the view. Jake had started playing an arcade machine. The music from the game sounded through the room. It sounded almost urgent. The title above the arcade machine read Carnival. Jake frantically searched for the instructions paper on the machine, but couldn't locate it. He fiddled around with the buttons for a bit and eventually found a start button. The game started and a disturbing clown head planted itself on the screen. Jake thus far had no controls. The screen turned to a black loading screen, showing a tiny bar signifying loading. The machine quickly flashed to a screen that showed a wall of text that was in an indecipherable language, using zeros and ones.
What's going on?
Kora said, looking to Jake for answers.
I don't know.
Jake shouted, trying to approach the machine to fix it. The screen shut off, yet the music still prevailed in a distorted fashion. Jake and Kora both backed away from the machine. The room started to fade away as well. Jake wasn't sure what was happening.
Kora!
Jake yelled into the darkness. His sister's figure began to gradually distort. Jake could feel tears start to flow down his eyes as his whole room turned to an endless void, only the arcade machine remaining. His head started to ache with pain as everything around him but the machine seemed to blur. The arcade machine showed two gleaming yellow eyes. The eyes started to transcend from the screen as he could see two completely white arms burst out of the screen of the machine. It crawled out and crashed to the ground. Its eyes widened, and its appearance enlarged as it inspected Jake. It opened its jaw, only looking like a black, gaping hole. It appeared on its face as it began to talk in a strange manner. Jake couldn't understand it, but its mannerism of talking disturbed him. Jake's ears ringed for several moments as he stared at the figure of the creature. It groaned and retreated back into the machine. The building, Kora, and the machine slowly faded back to normal. The machine was no longer titled Carnival and didn't even feature the same controls. It was instead a strength game titled Whack-A-Mole's Wacky Test of Wackiness. A peculiar name, Jake thought. Upon getting used to the surroundings again, Jake frantically looked around in an almost crazed state. From the window, he could see two eyes fade away in the distance. He could hear large stomps as the creature retreated back into the surrounding area. He could make out two skeletal hands, as well as a rib cage that was exposed. Jake shuddered and felt like he had lost his balance. He felt extremely nauseous.
What the hell was that thing?
Jake said, turning to Kora, whose pupils were dilated heavily as she shivered. All that Jake could hear on the building was white noise and the slight buzz of a fan. Both Jake and Kora didn't know what had just happened, and it's likely they wouldn't ever know. Jake stepped forward towards Kora.
Kora!
Jake got cut off by a small ping. It was his phone going off. He sluggishly shifted over to the table and turned on his phone. Jake gasped. It was a message from his mother. He looked at Kora with a blank look. He opened the message and his confusion grew. The message was just a random garble of letters, numbers, signs, etc. He slid his phone in his pocket slowly and held out his hand to Kora. Jake cut himself off.
We have to leave, Kora.
Kora grasped his hand tight as she struggled to get up. Her still shaking legs quickly lost their balance, but she got on her feet eventually. Kora groggily started walking forward, looking as if she had just woken up from a long nap. Jake stayed mute the entire walk back to their previous spot at the rides. The ride they had been sitting near was completely shut down. It wasn't being worked on either, and it was just so happened to be the only place Jake could find a bench. He let go of Kora's hand and sat down at the bench. A sharp pain shot through his back, and it seemed Kora had felt it too. Both of them were extremely exhausted.
I wanna go home.
Kora muttered, planting her face in her knees. Jake tried to sit and rest, but he could hear a huge crowd forming only a bit away from the ride they were at. Of course, no one would see them anyways. The ride was pretty secluded. All Jake knew was that that crowd was nearly going insane. He almost felt like he should go see what all the fuss was about, but he didn't see a point in it. He needed to sit down and think after the nightmare he'd been through today.
Hey!
Charlie exclaimed. He was greeting a child and shaking their hand. Charlie and Joseph had attracted a huge crowd while they were passing through. Charlie felt right at home, like he'd almost had his career back. Speakers were blasting his favorite tune, the Billboard March, as he was doing what he did best, being a funny guy. Joseph, however, seemed irked by the crowd. All he could do was awkwardly wave his hands at guests and hope they could make it out of the maze that was a crowd soon enough. Charlie leaned back to Joseph.
Hey, what's bothering you? You don't seem too well.
I need to get out of here. We don't have time for that, heavens.
Joseph snapped, grasping Charlie's wrist and bringing him directly in front of himself. Charlie went silent. In his mind, he had been in a place of triumph. He felt like he had gotten what he most desired back, his living. He had to face reality, though. All faded to white noise and everything blurred. Charlie slowly turned back to the crowd of children waiting to speak with him.
Hey, yo!
Charlie shouted through the crowd.
My partner and I here have some, business to attend to. Maybe stop by another time.
Charlie said while patting Joseph's shoulder. Joseph let on an awkward smile. The children in the very front of the line looked crushed. Charlie fished in his pocket on reaction. He remembered a few items he brought in preparation for this trip. He pulled out 2 lollipops.
Here you go.
Charlie said, smirking at the 2 children. They grabbed for the candy and sped off without question. The crowd itself quickly diverged after hearing Charlie would be leaving, and most of the people went back to either the rides or the vendors. After everything had cleared out, Charlie turned back to Joseph.
Pretty smart, eh?
Pretty smart, I suppose. Now, for the last time, stop getting off task.
Joseph spoke as the 2 went back to skulking around the carnival grounds. They were walking down a path that led directly back to the place where they came from. They came back upon the broken carousel. Charlie observed it, seeing that it had a big out-of-order sign plastered on it. Joseph, however, was observing something completely different. He bent down to Charlie's ear and whispered,
Evans, look.
Joseph said, pointing at a bench. 2 children were sitting on it, staring aimlessly at the sky, not doing anything. Charlie felt a sharp pain in his stomach upon seeing the sight. He finally found what he wanted, Charlie thought. Joseph pulled Charlie to the side.
All right, you are going to go after the girl. You still have more candy, right?
Joseph loud whispered to Charlie with a crazed look in his eye. Charlie was deeply intimidated by the way Joseph was acting. To think his mood switched so seamlessly. In mere seconds, Charlie thought.
Yeah, I do.
Charlie mumbled. He tugged on the collar of his shirt.
Okay, good. I'll go after the boy after you give her the candy. I'll take it as my cue.
Charlie nodded and started stumbling towards the bench. Joseph gave Charlie the thumbs up. He approached closer towards the bench. Charlie broke into a cold sweat again. He came face to face with the girl and her brother. Charlie stared back at Joseph, who was now hiding in a bush.
Hey,
Charlie tripped on his words, just like he had with the manager earlier.
what are you kids doing out so late?
Charlie spoke. The boy looked up at him. He said no words. Charlie knelt down to the girl's level.
Say I have some candy, yeah?
No sound but the distant echo of music.
My treat.
Charlie said, handing the last lollipop he had to the girl. He smirked at her. Despite that, she didn't really glow up like Charlie had expected her to.
Thanks.
She said in a monotone fashion, grabbing the candy and placing it to her side. Even though the lure didn't work, Joseph took his calling card anyway. He jumped at the boy quickly. Charlie leaned back and began frantically going for the girl. He grabbed her by both of her arms. Joseph came back from the darkness holding the boy by his arms, using his other hand to cover his mouth. Charlie gulped at the sight of what they were doing. He had heard stories from Malcolm, although now it was unfolding right in front of his eyes. He gazed down at the girl. The feeling in his stomach worsened. Charlie clenched his fists.
You know what? Fuck this.
Charlie said, completely loosening his grip on the girl.
I'm not conforming to your damn cult or whatever. I'm not doing it. First, it was James. Now it's these two? How many do you have to target before you realize how fucked up this is, Joseph?
Charlie stomped forward.
How many, damn it? You're letting this thing control you. You're nothing like when I first met you.
Charlie's voice cracked, and it seemed like as he said this, the atmosphere that he once was in changed drastically.
Now let go of the boy.
Charlie demanded, stepping forward once more, attempting to intimidate Joseph with his demeanor. Joseph started cackling. Charlie's ears filled with his demented laughter.
Look, Evans. I didn't think I'd have to treat you like I do Malcolm. You seemed trustworthy, but we have to do what we have to do. And that's to follow orders.
Joseph swiftly pulled out his blade, still covered in blood from the kill previous. He stepped forward with the boy. Charlie felt helpless, thinking he was going to try to hold the boy at knife point. Charlie's expectations were quickly reverted. Joseph pressed his blade against Charlie's neck, now wearing a wicked grin on his face.
Now, grab the girl. If you don't, you can lose your life along with these 2 brats. And I'll gladly watch you get ripped apart at the hands of the retriever.
Charlie, without a word, nodded. He went for the girl once more, who was on the ground, shuddering. She was shaking and her breaths were shallow. Charlie walked back through the exit. He couldn't handle this, but he had no choice in the matter. The boy was calling for his sister through Joseph's hand, but he couldn't make out what her name was. All of this consumed Charlie's mind, building a cloud of guilt that could last the rest of his life. Upon reaching Joseph's car, Joseph pulled out a roll of duct tape.
Let us go, you sick bastards.
The boy said, squirming in Joseph's grasp. Joseph said nothing in response and taped the boy's mouth shut. He let out a soft chuckle as he loaded the boy into his car. Charlie handed over the girl to Joseph and took his seat in the car. He grasped his face into his hands and exhaled. He couldn't stop thinking about what he could have done if he had just brought a weapon. If he had just stood up for himself. It was like all hope was lost. Joseph got into the car and they started down the back roads to the house. The whole ride home saw no talking from either Joseph or Charlie. The two in the back would grunt and whimper, but other than that, only the soft sound of wind outside the car remained. Charlie couldn't help but think about his nephew, who was around the boy's age. What if this were to happen to him? What would Charlie do?
Evans!
Joseph snapped in front of Charlie's face. His eyes quickly darted to Joseph, and he shook his head.
No, sorry.
Charlie began exiting the car. He got the girl out and walked her to the front deck of the house. Joseph stopped him at the door.
Evans, you wait here. I need to attend to some important business with these two.
Joseph grabbed the two children by their shoulders and walked them inside the house. Charlie assumed the worst.
God damn it!
Charlie mumbled to himself, sitting on the house's stairs, observing the night. His thoughts were overwhelming him. He vowed to never take a mission like this again. Charlie now understood what Malcolm had been talking about.
Maybe I should just head home,
Charlie said, speaking to himself. He got up and started stumbling to his car before he heard a distant sound. Charlie couldn't make out what it was, but as soon as he did, his stomach churned. It was a scream. 2 screams. Charlie stood like a statue for several minutes. He knew deep down he couldn't do anything. He was just an average guy, and he couldn't even make a change when he had the chance. Charlie got in his car and sat down for a few moments. He turned on his radio, and the music flooded into his ears. The weight of everything quickly toppled onto Charlie.
Now I'm bawling like a damn baby.
Charlie wiped his eyes, his makeup slowly smudging. He hadn't even remembered he had his makeup on. He rested his head on the back of his seat. He couldn't bring himself to drive, and it was already late. Charlie suddenly heard a ring from his pocket. He was confused at first, but quickly realized it was his phone. He snatched it out of his coat pocket. The caller ID displayed Ethan Evans. Charlie quickly turned his car radio off and accepted the call.
Hey, sport, what's up?
Charlie said, trying to keep his tone strong and cheery.
Hey, Uncle Charlie. The babysitter wants to know where you're at.
Ethan cut himself off as he could hear a muffled exchange between the babysitter and Ethan. He returned to the phone.
She's worried about you.
Well, tell her I'll be home shortly. I had a favor to help a friend with. Took way longer than I expected.
Alright then. Bye.
Alright, love ya.
Ethan quickly hung up the phone after that, leaving Charlie in complete silence. Charlie turned the key to his car and started his way home.
What have you brought me, Burns?
The creature's voice echoed through the room.
I brought you the sacrifices, as you asked, sir.
Joseph took off his hat and kneeled down. Jake and Kora were petrified by what they can only describe as pure evil. A monster built from the deepest, darkest corners of fear itself, right in front of them. Its soul-piercing yellow gaze and gaping maw filled with dagger-like teeth called Jake toward it. It subconsciously drew Jake closer and closer. Jake was shot out of his trance as the creature moved its hand closer to Kora. Jake tried to scream, but he couldn't. It snatched Kora by her arms and moved her closer to its gaping jaws. It opened its jaw wider, revealing rows upon rows of sharp teeth and secondary gums. Jake watched with utter terror. The man that brought them there stepped back to the corner of the room as if he were preparing for something. The creature brought its other arm over to Kora, holding her now by the sides of her body. It drew its jaws closer, and in an instant, the creature started to tear at Kora. 2 of its spindly fingers grasped Kora's head and began to tug on it with great force. Jake could audibly hear cracks from Kora's body as she screamed from within the confines of the tape on her mouth. Jake felt useless. He couldn't do anything but cave in. Tears started streaming down his face. The creature clenched its hands even tighter and completely tore Kora's head from her body. Jake could hear the bone shatter as her neck was stretched and ripped to pieces. Only a small amount of her spine remained attached to her head as blood poured from her now vacant body. It tossed her lifeless head into its jaws with ease, using its back rows of teeth to chew it. It then took her remaining form and tore into effortlessly, destroying her flesh, ripping her clothes, and exposing her rib cage and several other organs Jake didn't want to have to see. Blood splattered on everything in the room, Jake concluded. He vomited into his tape from the sight. One of Kora's remaining halves was tossed into its mouth, the other half being tossed aside next to the creature. The creature leered at Jake with a blood-stained smile. He closed his eyes and prepared for his demise. William took his seat in the questioning room, observing the convict he'd be speaking to. He wore a velvet suit with a white undercoat. His hair was messy and matted and his eyes bloodshot. The man gave a crooked smile as soon as Will sat down.
So, Joseph Burns,
Will said, sliding the files he had brought with him to the side. Joseph only nodded, retaining his wicked smile, although there was nothing to smile about.
So, let's start with the routine check. How old are you, Burns?
Will said, twiddling his pen in his thumbs as he awaited an answer. Joseph spoke up.
I'm 40.
Alright, do you drink or possibly do drugs?
Neither.
Will wrote down both answers. He then prepared to ask the big questions, as those routine questions were getting him nowhere.
Okay, Burns, I need you to give me an honest answer to this if you give me an honest answer to anything,
Will said.
What was the motive for murdering these people? You murdered Andrew Simmons, Jake Kutchaw, and Kora Kutchaw, correct?
Joseph nodded, putting on his wicked smile once more. Joseph looked as if he could burst out laughing at the thought of telling someone his real motive, but maybe he would bite.
Interesting you ask. My only motive was my loyalty to the Great Retriever.
Will's thoughts all stopped in their tracks.
Great Retriever?
Will muttered, raising his eyebrow at the response.
Yes, he instructed me to. He needs to eat. Am I wrong?
Joseph lightly giggled to himself.
You're not making any sense, bub,
Will said, his voice slightly cracking from the sheer atmosphere of the room.
Consider this, Wayne. The two brats' bodies were never found. Who are they? Did you ever consider who they might be?
Joseph gazed at Will, leaning towards him. Will quivered, chills going through his spine. Joseph leaned back.
And frankly, Wayne, I'm not up to give my loyalty up for a couple of idiot cops who have no idea what they're getting into.
Before Will had any chance to respond, Joseph fished into his pocket and pulled out a blade. It was lined with a rusty red substance. He slashed at Wayne, missing by less than an inch. In an impulse, Wayne drew his gun from his pocket, taking a shot at Joseph's shoulder. The shot knocked Joseph to the floor. He cackled and coughed, taking a retreat to the back of the room.
I need someone to come get this freak. Head over and check his pockets before sending him into the questioning room. You're fired!
Will barked into his walkie-talkie. A staff member quickly arrived and handcuffed Joseph once more, taking him deeper into the prison. Will sat down to catch his breath. He had no idea what Joseph had been speaking about, and he sure as hell wasn't getting anywhere with him. Will pulled out his phone and started a call.
Hello?
Someone said from the other side.
Hey, Thomas, so I just got done with Burns.
Will said, pulling the files from earlier back into his view.
Really? What did he say?
Not a whole lot. He kept ranting about his loyalty to the Great Retriever or something. Then he tried to attack me. No one checked his pockets.
Will said.
Jesus. Maybe Malcolm will be a bit more cooperative. Hopefully, anyway.
Thomas said, hoping for a response from Will.
Hopefully, you should be able to talk with him shortly. I'm supposed to actually question the guy soon.
Will said, leaning back in his chair.
Well, I'll be on my way, Tom. See you some other time.
Will said.
Alrighty. See you, Will.
Thomas hung up and Will quickly returned to his work. He had a lot more to figure out about this case. It struck him as familiar, but he couldn't set on why. Despite that, he'd figure it out. His curiosity of it wouldn't let him close the case that easily.
Alright, we should be close to getting there.
Charlie was driving down the road. He had been invited to a meetup at a local restaurant. He was bringing someone he knew as a friend of Joseph and Malcolm, whose name was Cornelius, and he had been with the group ever since Charlie had been drafted into it.
So, how's things been going, eh, Corn?
Charlie asked, trying to initiate conversation.
Not a lot. Just been doing what I usually do, which is usually nothing.
Cornelius chuckled at his little joke.
I feel that. Not a whole lot to do recently.
As the two finished up their exchange, Charlie was able to pull into the restaurant's parking lot. He and Cornelius exited the car. Charlie read the big letters on top of the restaurant's doors. They were at Bill Jackson's Diner. Charlie had never been here, but a few people he knows have.
Alrighto, Sean and Steven should be here already.
Charlie said. Sean had also been with the group for a while. Charlie found it funny how his brother somehow ended up with the group, along with his friend Steven. Charlie and Cornelius entered the building and almost immediately saw the group.
Chuck!
Sean exclaimed from a table. Charlie chuckled to himself, approaching his brother for a hug.
I thought I told you I go by Charlie now.
Charlie said, hugging his brother. Steven stayed at the table, awkwardly waving at Charlie. Cornelius, however, was just standing there. Charlie saw it fit to introduce him.
You guys know Cornelius. He shows up to the house sometimes.
Charlie said, patting Cornelius on the back. Cornelius held his hand up and took his seat at the table. The night quickly passed. The night's mood roared with excitement, a new life that Charlie hadn't felt in a long time, and for that matter, no one had felt in a long while. They laughed and chatted, but after everyone was done with their food, the mood quickly shifted. Steven coughed.
I haven't told you all why Sean and I invited you here yet, but I think now is an appropriate time.
He continued.
We all need to address the elephant in the room. Joseph and Malcolm are both now convicted criminals, and...
Steven cut himself off. Everyone at the table looked apprehensive about speaking on the issue.
And we need to do something about it. We can't avoid our demons forever, literally.
Everyone at the table knew what Steven meant about demons. Sean spoke up.
Adding on, me and Steven have already told you to some extent, but the Great Retriever is not the only problem. In fact, it's not the only of its species.
Sean continued.
There's another one, and it's not all cooped up in some room. It's actively stalking us.
The whole table had an ever-present solemn mood.
You all know what Sean's talking about, but we can manipulate these creatures like they have us, yeah?
Charlie said, looking to Sean for clarification. He nodded.
I think we all know what we gotta do.
Charlie said.
We have to get Malcolm out of prison somehow.
The whole table put on a confused face.
And how are we gonna do that without ending up as dead meat on the sidewalk, eh?
Cornelius questioned, sounding unsure of Charlie's statement. Sean suddenly perked up.
I think I know what Charlie means. As we know, these creatures are capable of shifting reality in some way. Or at least, our perception of it. I think we know how it intimidated us with the tactic when we first got involved with this.
Sean said, nodding and looking around the table.
It would shift the very scene around us, to make it the only thing present in our minds.
Everyone at the table nodded. Sean continued.
So, what if we used that same perception to help us slip into the prison with ease? I mean, a creature such as itself would do anything, as long as we promised one thing. That we were getting Malcolm out to help with its plan and diet.
Plan? What do you mean, plan?
Charlie said.
Well, the creature isn't just eating for the sake of it.
Sean stated.
That other creature I mentioned. Its name is Erebus. Steven and I had a run-in with it a couple years ago. And ever since then, we've been researching these beasts. Which is why we willingly joined the group, despite what you told us, Charlie.
The whole group was being put on blast with so much information it was overwhelming.
Now, we don't know much about the Great Retriever, but all Sean and I know is that it's working closely with Erebus to revive its species.
Steven added, looking at the whole table with a sense of uncertainty.
Which means that if we leave this issue at rest, we're destined to cause more harm than good. And what in the hell do you expect us to do?
Cornelius said.
I'm not sure. We only know that much, but we're still trying to fully understand it.
Sean said, standing up from his chair.
But I do know that we need to get Malcolm out. And I'll contact all of you once we've come up with a more coherent plan.
Sean zipped up his coat and began exiting the building.
Be seeing you.
Steven got up as well and followed Sean closely behind. Charlie and Cornelius were left by themselves at the table. Both of them didn't fully comprehend what they had just been told. Their questions outweighed their answers.
No, we should probably get going, eh?
Charlie said, getting his coat and walking towards the front doors. Cornelius hesitated to get up, but still followed Charlie out of the building. Cornelius sighed as he took his seat in the car. Charlie began driving down the highway to his house when Cornelius spoke up.
How do you suppose we're gonna get out of this rubbish?
Cornelius asked, almost muttering.
I don't know anymore, man. I'ma just do what I've been doing. Life's just been going ever since Malcolm kinda revolted or whatever. I've been clowning again, getting to see my nephew. Not bad stuff.
Charlie said, trying to lighten the mood.
But Sean's right. We gotta do something. Although we don't know what yet.
Charlie stayed silent for a few moments.
But whatever we do, I'm not backing down. I feel like I gotta avenge the 2 kids me and Joseph abducted. It feels right. They didn't deserve that, and that's a hell of an understatement.
Charlie ranted with no responses from Cornelius.
I wish I could just say I'm sorry, you know.
I don't know what to say. I haven't had to do anything disgusting like that.
Cornelius said.
But it's only a matter of time.
Days go by and we still laugh and revel. Heard the crowd and met the devil. I yearn for time 'cause I miss you. I've been thinking about what we used to be, 'cause I can't shake the thought that we are so changed from this game. But what we once be